All right, with this in mind, I think we can actually start. And I prepared a little something just to warm up before the first session starts. And I want to talk a little bit about something to inspire us through the rest of the day, to talk about something that's been on my mind quite recently and quite a lot. And I think that this is something that we should all be thinking about. And it has to deal with how we perceive and how we design experiences, but more specifically about how we create experiences that actually matter and that are memorable. And this is kind of an issue of personality-driven design, if you like. Now, many of you might have seen, wait a second, let me just drop in here. Many of you might have seen this tweet, right? Which of these two possible websites are you currently designing today? Right? Because there is one on the left and there is one on the right, and that's it. That's the internet 2018, right? There is nothing in between. The only difference, potentially, could be the placement of a carousel, which is sometimes at the top, sometimes at the bottom, and sometimes both at the top and at the bottom, because why not, right? But is it really the best we can do? I mean, we have these conversations happening a lot about everything is becoming too generic, everything is looking the same, nobody has a personality. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how we can embed some personality into our work, right? Because very often you end up in this dilemma where you just keep A/B testing the product to the death, right? If you look into the evolution of the toolbar, of a Photoshop toolbar, in case you're still using Photoshop, of a Photoshop toolbar from 1987 to 2017. Yes, it's a bit bigger, a few more buttons here and there, but is there a big difference? How many of you had this conversation in the past, let's say, 2 months or so? Now let's move away from rounded corners, 11 pixels, to 12 pixels. And then maybe 1 month later, let's go back to 11, right? Does it really matter? Is it really important? And I kind of asked myself, should we be doing something like this, where this is like a mock-up, not a mock-up, a tracking of what Facebook is experimenting with every single day. They would experiment a little bit with the design of the bottom bar and the iconography and the spacing, 1 pixel to the left, 1 pixel to the right, adding shading here and there, changing color here and there. Does it really matter? This is like the best. Some people really spend a lot of time thinking about this. This is the evolution of a bottom nav spanned over 2 months, right? And that's a lot of work, of course. But I think maybe this is not necessarily something that we all need to do to be memorable, right? And I attended this talk where this guy from Denmark, Morgan Smuller, spoke about how to create more interesting experiences. And he was speaking specifically about how we can stand out today. If we want to stand out, we need to have a charming personality. When I think about this, and when he talks about the unprecedented attention to detail, I feel like maybe this is, something like this would have a really strong personality. If you compare like a regular website with this website, that's a memorable website. When was the last time you attended a website or visited a website and you felt like, wow, what a hell of a website. I will never forget it in my life. But should websites be memorable? Can you think for a second how much time and effort and people and money and resources had to be put in this project to make all of this happen? This is not something you do on a weekend, right? Probably. And not with one person, right? This is a really heavy, dedicated effort. In the same way, like long reads like this, I'm sorry about the blinking, incredible amount of work, art-directed, long reads, with everything you ever want to have, from, infinite scrolling to parallax effects and everything, right? That's a lot of work. Not everybody can afford it. So I asked myself, what can we do? For our redesign, we couldn't go that far and create all of this creative stuff. We wanted to have something more pragmatic. And I asked myself, well, if we're talking about storytelling and art direction, which is a very important part of what we're creating, maybe we can have a very try to get a stronger impact of our work through storytelling and through art direction. And when I think about it, of course, I'm not thinking specifically about this, or even I'm creative this. And I'm definitely not thinking about this being storytelling. I don't see much storytelling here, to be honest. And you're coming from one place to another, and that's a service, and that's okay. But I don't have any emotional connection to this service at all. Sorry if you're working for Uber. I don't mind, Uber as a service at all. But I don't have any strong emotional connection at all. If there was a service that offered me the same thing, but on average maybe 5 cents cheaper, 10 cents cheaper, I'll jump right away. I don't have any emotional connection at all. But somebody has to give me money, so I move away from MailChimp, right? Because I have such a strong emotional connection with them. And one of the reasons is because they have a very humane personality, which is embedded through the people who work there and through the interface that they have. So MailChimp created these books, color books for children to just paint over, right? And it's just an incredible, incredible power of storytelling in place. Hi, I'm Freddy. It's fun to be me. Is it fun to be you, right? How can you answer this question in a negative way? I'm no fun at all. No, I'm not fun at all. You can't do that, right? In the same way, it just keeps going and going and going. And then, I love being me. Do you love being you? There's, again, no way you can answer it in a negative way. And I think the main reason why I would never move away from MailChimp is this in animation, which conveys the human emotion I have when hitting that button in such an incredible and powerful way. And I thought, maybe we should have a bit more of this. And so I asked myself, how? And I think I found a couple of options. So one of them is, well, maybe we can try to pick the most boring thing that we have and try to make it a bit more interesting, right? For example, what can be more boring than a pop-up or more annoying than a pop-up? Welcome to the best pop-up in the world. I wish every single website had it. It's so delightfully annoying. It's just incredible, right? I really wish every single site had it, right? And it does this service that it needs to do. It draws attention to itself, right? But in a very friendly and humane way. I would love to see more of this and less of generic red pop-ups. Another thing that comes up a lot, for example, these age selectors, right? How old are you? Because we need to know your age when you enter the site. You can make it more interesting. Sometimes you can type in whatever you like, literally, and will still enter, because they don't really care that much. Most people don't lie. Or they actually do lie, and then we can make it easier for them to actually get in. So one option would be just make it a bit more fun, right? No. Are you 21? If you click yes, you just enter the site. But if you're not, well, are you at least 18? Maybe 17? No? Well, you don't make it easy. Please tell us you're 16. And it just keeps going and going, and it's just, once somebody discovers it, this is such a strong emotional connection. I mean, I don't really care for beer, I'm sorry, but I really have a very strong, nice, positive connection with this website, right? It just keeps going and going. And there is no way to click yes here, by the way, which is kind of nice. And then you have the video, and you get the spirit, right, of it. Or what could be more boring than the title element, like a title thing in the checkout? That's probably, if you think about everything in the world, that's probably the most boring thing in the entire world. So can you make it more fun? Sure. Just allow people to have options, right? You can be a Mr. or Mrs. or whatever, but you can also be a major, a princess. Who wanted to be a princess at some point? All right, so I wanted to be a princess at some point, maybe. Or, group captain, or field marshal lord, which is my favorite. And it's a huge list. So, people say don't use drop-downs. For this, I would definitely use a drop-down, all right? So maybe we can just take something that's super boring and make it a bit more fun. Like many of you might have seen this before. It's just nice to look at. And, when we think about it, very often we have this tension to say, we should not make people think, but maybe it's about time that we introduce a little bit of friction here and there to make people think and pay attention, because everything else becomes then too generic. And so maybe it's a good idea to make people type and retype and overtype and delete and type again, just to have this emotional connection. So they spend a little bit more time paying attention to what we do, right? And of course, many of them will not care, but people who do care and people who do find it will actually really create this emotional connection that we want to achieve, right? And I spent so much time typing it just because it was so much fun, right? I think it's a really, really nice way of doing it. But not everybody can afford it, right? So sometimes you can't just have some fun because, you're working in a corporate setting, but you still can have some signature. And it can be anything from a visual treatment, where you pick a certain visual style and just use it consistently everywhere, Could also be something like a shape, where you just use a particular slanting, for example, consistently on all the buttons, on the navigation, on images and everywhere. This is exactly what we decided to do for smashing. There is not just rectangles and circles. You can use any shapes that you like. You can use any kind of custom shapes and SVG masks and everything. Right? We tend to limit ourselves to rectangles and circles, but there are so many other options to choose from. Right? In the same way, like, we can make it a bit more flowy in a way, so it doesn't feel so rectangular. Another way of doing it would be to use some sort of animation or transitions, or maybe the lack of animations and transitions, and introduce some kind of delays. So the one thing that makes this site different here is that things start showing up delayed, one after each other, and that's the signature. That's what they're using consistently everywhere throughout the site. So as you scroll up, things are actually delayed. They're not too fast. They're actually slowing down. Or think of something entirely different. This portfolio is different just because this guy decided, you know, I'm going to split myself into 3 parts, and every time you resize or hit refresh, it's going to be random, and I'm going to use a different background color on different pages. That's it, right? So you could have something like that as well. And I think the one more thing that is also, of course, fundamentally important there, to really think about what you want to tell. What is the story that you're telling? And of course, I'm not talking about storytelling as a traditional storytelling when you think about writing, but also how to introduce it in things like, for example, error messages. We spent a lot of time crafting error messages for the site just to make sure it fits in with the story. Now, if you look into it now, it will not make much sense. But in the context of the site, this would actually make pretty much a lot of sense, because we have a lot of cats everywhere, right? And so if you think about this experience, people will get, if they get an error message, very often they're annoyed, right? But what if you make them smile at the moment when they're annoyed? That's when you can connect with them the best, right? And this is why we also have wonderful buttons like this. So this is the heaviest clicked button on the entire site. Okay? So if you ask somebody, if you tell explicitly, this button does nothing, people click on it like crazy. If you look on the heat map, right? So why do you click on that button? I don't know, but everybody does. But we decided to test, maybe we can do something else. So what if you say this button does something? Well, nobody cares if the button does something or not, right? So you can actually play and introduce some kind of friction every now and again as well. And you also, and this is kind of the last thing I want to say, you also need to introduce some focus, right? Because there are some things that are really painful at times, not all the time, but at times, and it's your job, it's our job as designers to make it a bit better. So do you know that on YouTube, if you have a lengthy video, let's say 2 hours or so, you can actually increase the slider scale by scrolling up? That's a fantastic feature that I think nobody, I mean, how many of you know it? I'm using it like all the time. That's incredible. And it's not really documented everywhere. Just one designer, one person like you, making a really good judgment call, designing this and making it work. And it's incredible. That's the power that we have. And do not think that we should just stick to generic solutions because they work the best. Well, maybe for a calendar in a particular case, a design like this would be an option as well. This is a date picker. That's a very unusual date picker, I would say. Do you understand how it works? I'll give you just 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, right? So you might say, this is just ridiculous. Like, why would you build something like this? Well, it depends on the setting. This was built specifically for the New York library, where people have to tap in the date a lot. If you were doing it using an input field, then you have to focus on the field, and then you have to type. And otherwise, with this interface, you can just tap, 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 done, right? And you kind of have a physical connection with the position of those things on the screen. So even something that looks a bit ridiculous to us at first might actually make quite a lot of sense in the end. So the one last thing I want to leave you with is, it's also important not to be disrespectful, right? And I think that this is something that's missing quite a lot. If you look into this interface, which asks you, do you have children? Oops, sorry, right here, with a slider and an edit icon and an input field. That's strange. But somebody had to design it. Somebody had to go ahead and say, you know what? I think for that kind of question, do you have children? The best option that we have is to use a slider with an input field and an edit icon. That's just ridiculous, right? But also, in the same way, it's also ridiculous and really dishonest to create interfaces like the one Ryanair has created. You might have seen this before. When you wanted to fly with, this is an old design, but I still hate them. Sorry about that. So what they were doing is, when you book a flight with Ryanair in the past, when you were booking a flight, the insurance was added for you automatically, unless you know how to opt out. But you really need to know how to opt out. Because to opt out, you need to find it conveniently located between Denmark and Finland in country selector. Right? That's just mean on so many levels, right? That's just not okay at all, right? And then another thing that just came up recently, which some of you might have seen, which was an extremely huge success, Instagram advertising, right? People don't want to have any kind of weird objects on the phone. So they mimicked the hair. This is Photoshop, right? This is real, but it's not a hair-on image. It's just hair embedded into the image to generate clicks, right? And it works remarkably well for them. In the same way, somebody was inspired by this and created this with a little dirt added in here just to make sure people actually tap on it as well. Now, this is disrespectful in so many ways, and I think that this is something that we should be really going against for, of course. In the same way, people tend to read something as read, and then they just move on. Well, we can make it look like it's not read. So this article or this email has been read already, but we can just add this little dot to indicate that it might be, So you think that you might not see, did not see it here. So to wrap up, I think it's about time to create something that's really more interesting and not that generic. And I think it's about time that we actually take action and create interfaces that matter. And I want to leave you with this for the rest of the day, because we will never make something perfect, but I think we still can make it pretty good. Yes. So with this in mind, meow right here at you, and I think it's really important that maybe it's better if somebody really likes us or really hates us than if somebody doesn't care at all. So I would rather be hated than be just generic and not care about it all, right? So with this in mind, thank you for your attention. I'm going to stay here, I'm not going anywhere. It's not like,